Black billionaire pretends to be in a coma, but when he hears his nurse's confession, they called him lucky. But luck had nothing to do with it. Marcus Langston, self-made billionaire, CEO of one of the largest tech companies in America, had built his empire from the dirt up. A man who once slept in his car now owned private jets. But on the day of his greatest success, he was betrayed by someone he trusted. The crash that nearly killed him wasn't an accident, and as he lay in the hospital bed, eyes closed, tubes running through his body, the world thought Marcus was gone. But Marcus wasn't sleeping. He was listening to the whispers around him. The doctors, the lawyers, the friends, and most of all his nurse. She thought he couldn't hear. But when she leaned over one night, tears falling on his hand, she confessed something that shattered his soul more than any betrayal ever could. Her voice trembled as she said, "I never thought they'd hurt you because you're black, but I heard them. They said you forgot where you came from." That's when Marcus realized his coma wasn't just a test of survival. It was a window into the truth about power, privilege, and prejudice. The headlines spread across every screen: billionaire tech mogul in critical condition after car crash. To the public, it was just another breaking story about a man too rich to touch, too powerful to fall. But Marcus Langston wasn't another name in a headline. He was a man who had clawed his way up from the bottom, from the forgotten streets of Detroit, where success stories rarely came with happy endings. He built Langston Innovations out of a dream and defiance. Every contract he signed, every deal he made, came with whispers behind his back. "He's lucky. He's the diversity hire who got rich. Let's see how long it lasts." He had grown used to those words. He didn't know that soon they would turn into something darker. It started a week before the crash. Marcus had just announced his boldest move yet, a $500 million initiative to build tech centers in low-income black neighborhoods, jobs, scholarships, mentorships, the kind of opportunity he wished someone had given him when he was young. But not everyone celebrated. Anonymous emails hit his inbox with veiled warnings. "Stay neutral, Langston. You're making people nervous. Stick to business, not activism." He ignored them. He believed success could rewrite the narrative. He didn't realize that in some circles, success was seen as betrayal. The night of the crash was quiet, too quiet. Marcus was leaving an award gala, his tux jacket slung over one shoulder, the city lights reflecting off his black Bentley. His driver had the night off. He preferred driving himself sometimes. It reminded him he was still in control. The road stretched ahead like a river of light. His phone buzzed with congratulations. He smiled faintly, thinking of calling his mother. Then the car jerked. A light flashed on the dashboard. Brake failure. His body slammed against the seatbelt as the car swerved. He gripped the wheel, heart pounding. The world outside spun in a blur of asphalt and glass. He tried to regain control, but the car sped faster, the tires screeching like an animal in pain. The railing appeared too late. The sound of impact was deafening, a thunderclap of metal and flame. For a moment, everything went white. Then darkness. When he came to, there were sirens, voices. Pain, he couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't open his eyes. But he could hear. The doctors called it a coma. But Marcus's mind was wide awake, trapped inside his body. He listened to the shuffle of papers, the hum of machines, the whispered conversations in corners. The world went on without him, but he wasn't gone. He recognized the voices first: business partners, board members, the men who had smiled with him on magazine covers. "What happens to the company now?" one whispered. "If he's out, we need to act fast." Another replied, tone cold, "Clip, we'll move the shares tomorrow. The market won't wait. Besides, it's about time someone with real experience took charge." A pause. Then a quiet laugh. "Can't say I'm surprised. They never last long at the top." Her name was Naomi Carter, a quiet presence in the fluorescent, lit corridors of St. James Memorial. She was the kind of nurse who went unnoticed, hair pulled back neatly, voice soft, movements precise. To her colleagues, she was dependable, ordinary. To Marcus, though he couldn't open his eyes to see her, she was the only person who spoke to him like he was still there. Every night, she came in just before midnight, checking his vitals, adjusting his IV, whispering updates he couldn't respond to. But she spoke as if he could, and somehow that belief reached him through the fog that separated his mind from the world. Naomi hadn't been assigned to Marcus by chance. The other nurses avoided his room when they could. "He's a billionaire," they'd mutter. "Entitled, cold. Probably a nightmare when he wakes up." But Naomi didn't see that. She'd read about Marcus Langston years ago, about how he'd grown up in the kind of neighborhood where she still rented her tiny apartment. To her, he wasn't some untouchable figure. He was proof that the world could change, that people like them could climb higher. Maybe that's why she volunteered to take extra shifts when he was brought in. Still, even she couldn't ignore the tension that clung to the air around his case. The doctor spoke in low tones when they thought no one was listening. Visitors came late at night, men in tailored suits who never left names at the front desk. They brought files, hushed phone calls, nervous glances. Naomi pretended not to notice, but she did. She always did. One rainy night, she stood beside Marcus's bed, the storm outside roaring like a living thing. The lights flickered once, twice. She checked his monitors, then froze as she heard footsteps in the hall. Two men stopped outside the door. Through the small window, she saw one of them, Marcus's lawyer, or maybe his business partner. She couldn't remember which, leaning close to the other. "You really think he'll wake up?" the man asked. The other chuckled softly. "If he does, it won't matter. Everything's already signed. He'll be lucky if there's anything left in his name." Naomi's stomach dropped. The words hit her harder than she expected. She waited until their voices faded before she turned back to Marcus. He lay still, his face pale, his chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm. "Mr. Langston," she whispered, voice shaking, "I don't know if you can hear me, but something's not right." She looked around the room, as if the walls themselves might betray her. "They talk about you like you're already gone," she said softly. "They said—" She stopped, biting her lip. The words tasted like guilt. "They said it was your fault, that you forgot where you came from, but I don't believe that." A tear slid down her cheek, falling onto the back of his hand, and in that fragile moment, she thought she saw the faintest twitch of his finger, a whisper of life fighting to return. Days turned into weeks, and Marcus remained motionless, locked in the same suffocating silence. But in that stillness, his mind sharpened. He listened every whisper, every conversation, every betrayal that hid behind polite tones and polished shoes. His hospital room became a stage where masks slipped one by one, and the truth revealed itself in fragments. He realized how fragile power was, how quickly respect turned into vultures circling what they thought was a dying man. The first cracks showed when his doctor entered one afternoon with two men in suits. Marcus recognized one of them instantly, his chief financial officer, a man he'd mentored for years. The doctor spoke in a clipped, rehearsed tone. "It's unlikely he'll recover cognitive function," he said, as if discussing a lab report. "Not a living person. We'll have to prepare for long-term care." The CFO nodded slowly, eyes cold. "Do what's necessary. I'll handle the transition." The transition. Marcus's stomach twisted. They were planning his exit before his body was even buried. The days blurred after that. Conversations drifted in and out like smoke. Lawyers discussing assets, accountants arguing about control. Even his lawyer, the one who'd sworn loyalty, spoke of Marcus as if he were a liability. "If we declare him legally incapacitated, we can transfer authority. Investors will want stability." The reply was a quiet, knowing laugh. Stability. That's what they call it when they steal from a man who can't defend himself. But what struck Marcus most wasn't just the greed. It was the way they spoke about him. Not as a visionary or leader, but as a statistic, a symbol they'd outgrown. One board member even said it out loud. The market liked him because he was different. Now that novelty's worn off, another voice chimed in, low but venomous. "Let's be honest, people like him aren't built for this world. Too emotional, too reckless." It was only a matter of time. Naomi overheard parts of it too. She began asking quiet questions, piecing together what was happening. But every time she did, she was met with warning looks. "Stay out of it, Naomi," her supervisor hissed. "You're not here to eavesdrop. Do your job and go home." Yet she couldn't. Something in her refused to let it go. She started staying longer after her shifts ended, reviewing patient logs, watching who came and went from Marcus's room. The patterns didn't add up. One night, she caught sight of a man slipping an envelope into the doctor's coat pocket. Money. Her heart pounded. She tried to tell her superior, but he cut her off sharply. "Don't be naive," he said. "You think powerful men fall from grace on accident. This is how the world works." That sentence echoed in her head as she walked back into Marcus's room. He lay there in the half-light, still and silent, but she swore she could feel something under the surface, an anger, a pulse, a presence that refused to die. It was a Thursday night when Naomi finally decided she couldn't stay quiet any longer. The tension in the hospital had grown unbearable. Too many closed-door meetings, too many unfamiliar faces coming and going from Marcus's room. She'd heard enough to know that something terrible was being hidden, but not enough to prove it. The fear of losing her job clashed with the guilt that gnawed at her every time she changed Marcus's IV and saw his still face. She could no longer separate right from wrong, only silence from complicity. That evening, she slipped a small voice recorder into her pocket before starting her shift. It was old and scuffed, something she'd used during nursing school to record lectures. Now it would be her only weapon. The halls were unusually empty, the air heavy with the smell of disinfectant and rain. She paused outside Marcus's room, glancing both ways, then stepped in quietly. His heart monitor beeped steadily, a sound that had become her only constant. She leaned closer and whispered, "If you can hear me, Marcus, I'm going to find out what they did." Moments later, she heard voices approaching. She moved to the corner, pretending to adjust supplies. The door opened, and two men entered. One of them she recognized immediately, Mr. Crane, the chairman of Langston Tech. The other was the doctor overseeing Mark's case. Their conversation began in low tones, but Naomi heard enough to know she'd been right. "He's stable enough to wake soon," the doctor said cautiously. Crane's voice dropped into a cold whisper. "Then make sure he doesn't. Not until we're finished. You'll get your bonus, same as before." Naomi's blood ran cold. She pressed the recorder deeper into her pocket, trying to steady her breathing. After a few more minutes, the doctor left, leaving Crane alone in the room. He stared down at Marcus's motionless form. "You could have stayed quiet, Langston," he muttered. "But you had to play hero, had to turn your company into a charity. You forgot who built this place." The words dripped with contempt. "Men like you climb too fast, and when you fall, you make the rest of us look bad." Naomi couldn't hold it in any longer. She stepped forward, voice trembling but firm. "That's enough." Crane turned sharply, startled. His eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" "A nurse," she said. "But I heard everything." Crane smiled slow and cruel. "You think anyone's going to believe a nurse over me? You don't understand how this works." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "People like him, people like you're useful until you're not." Naomi's heart hammered. She reached into her pocket, clutching the recorder. "Maybe," she said, "but I think someone will care about this." Crane's eyes flickered to the device, and his mask cracked. He lunged toward her. The recorder hit the floor, sliding under Marcus's bed. The sudden commotion jolted the monitors to life, the beeping accelerating wildly. Naomi froze, staring as Marcus's fingers twitched, his chest rising faster, his eyelids fluttering against the weight of the world pressing down on them both. The hospital erupted into chaos the moment Marcus's eyes opened. Doctors flooded the room, shouting orders, their disbelief barely contained. Naomi stood frozen by the bed, the recorder still on the floor beneath the tangle of wires. Marcus blinked slowly, trying to focus, his voice weak but steady as a single word escaped his lips, the "nof." The sound silenced the room. Weeks of silence broke with one fragile breath, but it was enough to turn everything upside down. The next hours passed in a blur of white coats, flashing lights, and questions he wasn't ready to answer. He didn't care about medical updates or press statements. He wanted Naomi. When they were finally alone, Naomi bent down and picked up the recorder, her hand shaking. The small device was still blinking red. It had captured everything. She placed it on the table beside him. "You were right," she whispered. "They tried to bury you." Marcus's gaze met hers, weak but burning with a clarity that had nothing to do with medicine. He couldn't move much, but his fingers brushed hers. A silent thank you, a promise that the world would soon hear what had been done. The news broke within 48 hours. Naomi had turned the recording over to the police, and the investigation exploded across every major outlet. "Corporate scandal at Langston Tech." The headline screamed. Crane was arrested, along with two other executives implicated in the cover-up. The recordings revealed everything: the sabotage, the lies, the racism dripping through every conversation. The same voices that once called Marcus a symbol of diversity were now tripping over themselves to distance their names from the scandal. Marcus spent the next few weeks recovering. The world outside spun with chaos, lawsuits, and media frenzy, but inside his room things were quieter. Naomi visited every day, reading him the articles he didn't want to see, keeping him updated only when necessary. Sometimes they just sat in silence. She would stare at the floor, still haunted by Crane's words. "You're useful until you're not." Marcus understood that pain too well. He'd built an empire just to prove that statement wrong. Yet even after billions of dollars and global recognition, the world still saw him through the same narrow lens. When he was finally discharged, the reporters swarmed him like vultures. "Mr. Langston, what will you do now?" One shouted. "Will you rebuild the company?" Another asked. Marcus paused at the steps of the hospital, cameras flashing in his face. His voice was calm but filled with quiet fire. "You can rebuild a company," he said. "You can't rebuild a conscience." Those words echoed across news cycles for days. But Marcus didn't stop there. Within months, he dismantled Langston Tech entirely, redirecting every remaining asset into a new foundation aimed at fighting corporate discrimination. Naomi became the foundation's director. They worked side by side, exposing hidden bias, giving power to stories that corporations buried. For Marcus, the money no longer mattered. The silence had taught him what it truly meant to have a voice. Sometimes survival isn't just about breathing, it's about seeing. Marcus Langston went to sleep as a billionaire. He woke up as a witness. What he heard in silence changed how he saw the world forever. People like Crane didn't just run corporations, they ran narratives. They decided who was worthy, who was angry, who was lucky. Marcus learned that racism didn't always wear a hood. Sometimes it wore a $5,000 suit and smiled in your boardroom. But he also learned something deeper. Power means nothing if it's not used to protect those without it. And truth, real truth, doesn't whisper, it screams. Naomi once said she was just a nurse. But she became the voice that saved him, and in a way, saved herself. Because courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers into the ear of a man everyone thought couldn't hear. And that's how the world finally listened.